Okay, this is very strange for me and somewhat uncomfortable, but we'll do what we can here. Uh, so this is for Mystics. This is Monday the 16th. So this we'll try to finish up some Norris here and give you guys something to do, something to post about, I suppose. In general, uh, try to stay as calm as possible and do what we need to do here. Again, this I'm making this up as I go along, so bear with me. I said in the email I sent you that office hours would be that I'm available by phone and email. Also, I think if we want, we could try FaceTime or Zoom or something along those lines. If you wanted to talk face to face, we can do something like that too. I'm using these videos to highlight main points as we go through. I'm going to try to keep them short, so I'm only going to really kind of highlight some of the main points of the readings. There's a lot more to talk about, there's a lot more to do, but that's what we're not, that's what we're sacrificing here as we go forward. So, I wanted to kind of pick up with the Celibate Passion chapter, starting on page 116 in Norris. And the one of the main themes that we get in this, I've got the book right here, so I'm going to try to do this just like I would in class. That on page 117, about a third down, she talks about the freedom that's tied to celibacy. And in this case, this is not the situation of taking a vow of celibacy is not the equivalent of kind of wanting to be with somebody and just ending up single, even though you kind of are longing for a relationship. This is an intentional choice on the part of these people. And by choosing to be uninterested or unconcerned with dating and marriage, the idea here is that there is a freedom to focus one's attention on whatever the good is, whatever the need is in front of them. I mean, honestly, at a time like this, you think about, my responsibility for my family, for my children, and the fact that I wouldn't be taking care of my kids, making them the priority anyway, if I go out and take care of everyone else who's in need, which maybe I should be doing, I don't know. But the idea here is that certain people are freed from these immediate responsibilities in order to focus more deeply on whatever problems, whatever needs arise in front of them. So this is the kind of the way in which Norris approaches this topic. On page 118, she describes this as a discipline, as we've been discussing so far. A huge amount of the spiritual life is a matter of discipline. Even the mystics who we see narrate encounters with God in very dramatic ways. Most of the life of someone like John of the Cross or Teresa of Avila is a matter of ongoing discipline, of continuing to turn once again, over and over again to God. But on page 118, she talks about this as a conscious form of sublimation. And I think that's an important distinction. Again, this form of sublimation, meaning kind of transformation of sexual energy, sexual desire to something else. This isn't repression. This isn't pushing down sexual desire or one's sexuality. It's about channeling that energy and that focus into something else. And for religious men and women, by religious I mean people who have taken the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, or for priests in a diocese who don't take those vows but still are celibate. The idea here is that the energy, the focus that would be devoted to one's family and one's career is instead reoriented and turned towards one's work. So if you think about the Jesuits on campus, the idea is that Rather than families, they have the freedom to be present to students in ways that other people do not, and the ability to be sent where they need to go, as those of us who have other obligations do not. So it's an intentional rechanneling of one's energy. She kind of articulates this on page 118 in the middle. But she's discussing this in marriage, right? She's in 118. She says, "As any marriage is time of separation, ill health, or just plain crankiness, in which sexual intercourse is ill-advised, and it's precisely the skills of celibate friendship that can help a marriage survive through rough spots." So she's even highlighting the fact that within a marriage, you have situations in which, the only way of showing love is not sexual intimacy, but other forms of love, right? Showing up for somebody, helping them out, taking over responsibilities, just generally being a friend. And that those skills are not qualitatively different for those who have taken vows of chastity. That they have close relationships, sometimes with other members of their order, sometimes with people outside the order. I mean, if one of you were to become a monk or a nun, it's not as though you would just no longer have the friends that you have now. I mean, those friends that you had at one point in your life continue, and they deepen, and so the friendships are still there. And the idea here, as she puts it at the bottom of that paragraph, is when you can't make love physically, you figure out other ways to do it. And so you reorient the acts of love from physical and focused on one person to being able to be focused on whoever presents themselves to the need. She presents themselves in need. At the bottom of page 119, she says, then, one reasons I enjoy celibates is they tend to value friendship highly. And in the absence of a singular one person that you go back to, friendships end up being that much more of a source of life and a source of kind of ongoing fulfillment. On page 120, 121, she mentions something that's actually significant for her as a woman, to be around men who have taken vows of celibacy, and that to be in a situation where the dynamics of possibly dating, possibly getting together with somebody, when those are just taken out of the equation, when everybody's on the same page about kind of the limits of those relationships, then you have the opportunity for a deepening of friendships in other directions, and a level of safety that you probably wouldn't feel, for instance, if you were at a bar or at a Friday night party at Regis. So the idea here is that you kind of remove a complicating factor to allow a level of closeness to develop in another circumstance, another context. On page 121, we're about a third down on the page, she says, the purpose of celibacy is not to attain some impossibly cerebral goal mistakenly conceived as holiness, but to make oneself available to others, body and soul. Celibacy, simply put, is a form of ministry, not an achievement. It's not something that is kind of independent of the vows of transformation of life that the Benedictines take, right? To just be celibate for the sake of celibacy is a very different goal and way of life than what the Benedictines are talking about. That the celibacy is tied into the ministry itself, tied into the other aspects of the life. It's not something that is an achievement that you kind of check off. It's like, okay, I'm celibate, now what? But the celibacy is one way of articulating this making oneself available to others. And again, to think about the difference between the obligations that a married person has to spouse and to children versus the obligations, the freedom that a vowed celibate person would have to be able to go where they're needed, to respond as they're needed, to drop whatever's going on and to answer the needs in front of them, but also to have kind of long-term freedom, right? Like I, for instance, need to think about my kids' college education. I need to think about making sure that my career and my wife's career, that we have some stability in order to pay for the needs of my family. Those immediate needs of stability are taken care of by the order, right? So it frees up the celibate person to not be concerned with the immediate material needs and to move on to something else. I think it's also worth mentioning what she mentions at the bottom of page 122, the fact that all human relationships are by their nature incomplete. That even within a marriage, that other person is not going to be everything for you and cannot be everything for you. And that the vow of celibacy bears witness to the incomplete nature of all of our lives here. And the fact that we're all, and again, this is this is an act of religious faith, right? But that we're all dependent on God for our ultimate peace. So I want to highlight a couple more things. The next video I will make will focus on this chapter on virgin martyrs, but I do want to highlight a couple points from the other chapters that I asked you to look at. The good old sins chapter on page 125. I think it's worth highlighting the fact that specifically on page 127, she's discussing sin in a way that should should remind us of Augustine. So in the middle of 127, she says, sin is an aberration. It's not natural to us at all. That sin is not part of human nature. We often have this comment that we make about, well, this person did this horrible thing. It's just human nature. She's pointing out the fact that human nature, as created by God, which is the Judeo-Christian faith, is not sinful. Sin, because it's a privation of what ought to be there, sin is an aberration of what is natural. As she continues at the bottom of 127, it's a diverting of divine gifts. It is a embrace of a lesser good instead of a higher good. It's a use of a divine gift, of a talent, of a attribute that we have in order to achieve something less than perhaps we ought to be pursuing with it. So sin is an absence of the good that ought to be there. It's a lack of formation, a lack of discipline, a lack of attention, a lack of love. It's not an act in and of itself that's kind of legally right or wrong, but it's an absence of it's a breakdown of a relationship. It's a choosing of something that's easier, faster, more immediate, rather than a higher calling for each person. So that's the part of that chapter that I think is worth teasing out. So spend some time looking at that. Okay, so I guess that's it for this one.